She clutched a small suitcase and the letter that promised her a husband. But when Thomas Carter saw her, he recoiled at her foreign accent. His mother sneered, arms crossed. "A kitchen maid's voice from the old country," she spat. Elena pleaded, "I learned your words. I left everything." But they turned away, leaving her alone in the rain. Letter ink bleeding in a puddle. Townsfolk stared, whispered. Elena's heart twisted. No husband, no family, just the taste of shame. Yet by the water trough, a quiet rancher watched her, not with pity, but with recognition. One rejection, one chance, and her story began with Silas Boone. The whistle shrieked as the train slowed into Ironwood Junction, its final plume of steam curling into the pale, restless sky. Elena Markova pressed her forehead to the smudged glass, watching dry prairie grass bend beneath the wheels. For a moment, she could almost see her mother's figure on the snowy platform back home, red scarf tied under her chin, eyes rimmed raw from weeping. "Promise me, Lenachka," her mother had whispered, gripping her hand so tight it left crescent moons in Elena's skin. "Promise me you won't let them make you small. If you must bow, bow to God alone." She had promised, but now as the train clattered to a stop, her knees trembled. The letter, thin parchment worn from too many readings, peeked from her pocket like a mocking ghost. "My dearest Elena, I cannot wait to hear your voice." Thomas Carter had written that line in a crooked hand. He said he loved that she was pure, honest, untouched by this rough country. He said she would be his angel, his reward for working the cattle under the hot Texas sun. She stepped down onto the cracked planks of the Ironwood Junction platform. The dry wind stole the last warmth from her coat. Dust rose in idle swirls around her boots. The townsfolk eyed her, not openly hostile, but with that tight-lipped suspicion reserved for anything not born on Texas soil. A mother pulled her boy closer. A man spit tobacco, muttering something about foreign brides and mail-order nonsense. Then came the Carters. The polished black carriage rolled up, its brass trim catching the thin sun. Thomas climbed out last, smoothing his vest, fidgeting with his gloves like they were suddenly too tight. His mother's eyes narrowed at Elena's bonnet, her coat, the way her accent curled the edges of "hello." "You're Miss Markova?" Thomas asked, voice catching like a branch under ice. Elena's heart leapt, stupid with hope. Yes, sir, I am Elena. We write letters, yes?" "You say—" His mother's nostrils flared. "You sound like a farmhand. We expected better speech." "You didn't tell us, Thomas." He shifted, eyes darting. "I didn't know it'd be so thick. I thought you'd be more, well, Canadian or something." Elena's cheeks burned. "I learned your words. I left my mother. Everything. You say, you write I am your—" The older woman scoffed, glancing at the townsfolk who had paused to watch. "We cannot have our name dragged through the mud with this. My son deserves a wife who sounds respectable." Whispers rose like nettles. "Poor girl, came all this way. Should have known better. Selling yourself in a letter." Thomas wouldn't meet her eyes. The promise in his letters shriveled like wet paper left in the sun. He took a step back, shame half hiding behind his mother's starched skirt. "I'm sorry, can't." When the carriage wheels turned away, the hush that fell over the platform felt colder than any winter Elena had left behind. Her mother's voice echoed through the silence. "Don't let them make you small." But under that sky, she had never felt smaller. Silas Boone had always known the land could take as much as it gave. The first thing it took was his older brother Jed, the one who taught him how to ride fence lines in the dark, how to stand his ground when a bull bucked mad. That summer, the stampede came like thunder rolling over the prairie. Jed was out front, waving his hat to turn the cattle when a young steer panicked. By the time the herd settled, Jed's hat lay crumpled in the dirt, and Silas had to drag him home over his own saddle. That was 5 years ago. Since then, Silas spoke little, worked dawn to dusk on the Boone Ranch, and kept the house just warm enough not to feel the ghosts. He'd come to town only when salt, flour, or nails ran out, and when he did, he kept to himself. Crowds itched at his skin. Talk felt heavier than fence posts. So when he saw Elena Markova that gray afternoon, Standing by the station's water trough, soaked through, coat clinging to her thin frame, he felt something stir in the hollow he'd carved around his heart. She held her cracked suitcase like a shield. Her eyes were wide and storm-colored, but the storm was all inside her. People stared, muttered, "The foreign bride," and drifted past like she was no more than an abandoned crate. Silas approached slow, boots sinking in the damp clay. "Ma'am," he said, voice deep but even. She flinched as if words might bite harder than silence. "You got somewhere to go?" She tried to lie, but her throat failed her. She only shook her head. Without asking more, Silas shrugged off his oilskin coat. Rough wool lined with flannel. He held it out. "Here, dry." Her fingers trembled as she took it, eyes searching his face for insult or debt. She found neither. They rode back to his place in the rattling wagon, the prairie wind cutting through the tarp he'd pulled over her shoulders. He said little, and she asked nothing. That night, Elena reheated stale bread, while Silas mended a torn shirt by lantern light. She moved quietly, wiping the table twice, though no crumbs remained. Outside, Silas heard the fence gate rattle in the wind, the same wind that once carried Jed's last breath away. But when he looked back inside, he saw the small woman at his table, sleeves rolled, sleeves patching holes he hadn't noticed. And for the first time in years, the house felt less empty. Morning on the Boone Ranch came soft and slow, but Elena rose before dawn anyway. Back home, her mother would stoke the oven while the church bells still slept. Old habits clung tighter than any coat. Here the prairie winds slipped through the window seams and lifted the thin flour right off the table. Her first attempts at baking turned to lumps of tough dough or scattered dust across Silas's kitchen floor. She cursed in Russian under her breath, then laughed at herself, brushing flour off her nose before trying again. Silas never complained. If he noticed that the bread was hard or the stew too thin, he only nodded and kept chewing, eyes warm above his tin mug. One evening after she'd burned the cornbread for the third time, Elena found his old boots by the hearth, soles cracked, stitching undone along the sides. She sat cross-legged on the floor, lantern flickering over her shoulder, and worked careful rows of thread through leather until her fingers cramped. When Silas found her there, half asleep beside his boots, he didn't say a word. He just set a folded blanket over her shoulders before he went back out to the barn. By the second week, Elena decided she'd have to learn to ride properly if she was ever to be useful beyond the stove. Silas's oldest horse, a sway-backed roan named Maple, stood patient as she struggled with the stirrups. Her first try ended with her face down in the dirt and a mouthful of prairie grass. But the horse waited, and so did Silas, watching from the fence line with that quiet grin he never spoke out loud. By the third day, she could stay on Maple's back long enough to ride out to the stream and back. Her laughter carried on the dry Texas wind. It wasn't just Silas and Elena anymore, though. Word traveled faster than freight wagons out here. Old Emmett Dale, Silas's ranch hand from his brother's days, came limping up the porch one morning, hat in hand. He nodded at Elena like she was the final puzzle piece he'd been waiting for. "Mornin', ma'am," he said, voice cracked like summer clay. "'Bout time this place smelled like bread again." Then came Clara Whitlow, the widow from the next ranch over, her husband long buried on the hill behind her house. Clara brought over sweet potatoes and a jar of pickled peaches. She sat with Elena on the porch swing, teaching her how to fold biscuits the Texan way, pinching each edge like sealing an envelope of hope. But it was the boy who changed everything. Jonas Two Rivers, half Cherokee, all elbows and wild hair. He'd hover by the fence whenever Silas drove cattle near the woods. One afternoon, Elena caught him peeking through the kitchen window, eyes wide as she hummed a tune over the wash basin. Instead of shooing him off, she stepped outside, wiped her hands on her apron and asked, "Do you want to learn?" "Learn what?" Jonas frowned, shoulders tense to bolt like a startled colt. "Music," she said, pointing to the dusty keyboard Silas had dragged back from the abandoned church. One octave short, but still good enough to dream on. Jonas looked at the keys, then at her, and something eased in his eyes. Week by week, the Boone Ranch filled with the clumsy, halting sound of old hymns and half-remembered folk songs. Jonas's small hands stumbled over the keys, but Elena's voice rose soft and clear, guiding him through each note. Emmett would pause his work by the chicken coop to listen, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in years. Clara brought fresh eggs and lingered by the open door, smiling at the melody drifting into the yard. Even Silas, who rarely stepped inside during lessons, found himself leaning against the doorframe, boots dusty, hat in hand, letting that fragile music stitch shut the empty places the land had carved in all of them. The wind carried the rattle of carriage wheels long before Elena saw them. She stood at the kitchen sink, hands wrist-deep in warm soapy water, when a glint of brass caught her eye through the window. A polished black carriage lurched over the dusty Boone Ranch road, far too fancy for this land of cracked fence posts and tilting barn doors. Inside the carriage sat the people who'd once left her at the station like an unwanted crate. Thomas Carter, velvet vest too bright for the prairie sun, perched awkwardly beside his mother. Her hat pinned high with stiff white feathers that shivered in the breeze. His father sat opposite, cane tapping the floorboards, though he needed no help to stand. Silas Boone was chopping firewood at the side of the barn when the carriage came to a stop near the porch. He wiped sweat from his brow, axe slung over one shoulder. His eyes flicked once to Elena at the window, a silent promise that he would not interfere unless she asked. The Carters disembarked in a huff of Sunday-best pride, though it was Thursday and their smiles were brittle as old bones. Thomas stepped forward first, clutching a bouquet of irises already wilting in the heat. Miss Markova, Elena, he corrected himself, voice a poor echo of the bold lines he'd once written her. May we speak? She didn't answer right away. She dried her hands, folded the cloth, and stepped onto the porch. Her eyes didn't flinch from his. Speak, then. His mother jumped in before he could draw breath. We've given this much thought, you see. It was all a misunderstanding, a rush of nerves. Ironwood Junction gossips. But we know a proper arrangement can still benefit you. Thomas forced a smile, lifting the flowers higher. I made a mistake, but now, with my name on everyone's lips, it's clear we should do what was planned. There's a chest in the carriage, proper dowry, rings, even a dress if you'd like. Elena's laugh cracked through the dry air like thunder. You want to buy me back now that your name is bruised? His smile faltered. It's for both our good. No. Her voice was sharp but calm. I am not for sale, and my voice, this voice, will not be erased to make you comfortable. Thomas's face flushed, eyes darting to where Silas now leaned against the barn wall, arms crossed over his chest. You think this cowboy gives you more than we can? Elena stepped down from the porch, closing the space between her and the Carters. He gives me nothing, she said, each word like a stone dropped into still water. He asks for nothing, but he stands beside me, not in front, not behind. Thomas's father scowled, puffing his chest. This is a generous offer, girl. Do not mistake your place. Silas pushed off the barn wall then, boots crunching gravel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for the axe he'd leaned against the woodpile. He just stood behind Elena, close enough that she could feel the quiet strength of his presence. She's got a place, Silas said, voice steady as a fence post driven deep. It ain't yours to decide. The wind cut through the awkward silence, flaring the feathers on Mrs. Carter's hat like a tattered flag. Thomas opened his mouth, some last scrap of pride fighting to speak. But Elena turned away before he could. Her shoulders straight, voice steady, she said, Go, and take your dowry with you. The Boone Ranch needs no charity. Silas didn't move until the carriage wheels cracked down the lane, carrying the Carters back to town, smaller than when they'd arrived. By the time the flames hissed down to embers, the Boone Ranch smelled like wet ash and burnt cedar. The dawn was thin and cold, painting the world in pale gray, as if to rinse the blackness from the night before. Silas sat propped against the porch rail, eyes half shut, the right sleeve of his shirt torn away so Elena could dress the angry red skin beneath. She worked in silence, dipping a scrap of linen into a chipped bowl of cool water, laying it over the blisters on his shoulder. Her fingers trembled each time he flinched, though he never made a sound. Don't you ever do that alone again, she whispered, voice raw from smoke and fear. Not without me. Silas cracked a lopsided smile, lips split at one corner. What would you have done? Run into the flames behind me? If it meant not watching you burn? Elena's eyes met his, fierce and shining with tears she refused to let fall. Yes, he didn't argue. The truth of it sat between them, heavier than words. Inside, the rescued horses stomped restlessly in the temporary paddock he'd cobbled together at dawn. Their dark eyes followed Elena's movements, as if they knew she had a hand in saving them too. The woman who had stitched their owner's boots, learned to ride on the gentlest mare, hummed old lullabies when the nights ran too long. When Silas drifted into sleep, head resting against the porch post, Elena slipped back inside. She poured out the soot-blackened water and started clearing the table. That's when she found it, tucked beneath the oil lamp, beside the half-burned candle stub. A small iron band, rough, imperfect, shaped by someone with hands too big for delicate work. An old piece of fence wire, bent slow and sure into a ring. No velvet box, no store-bought shine, but her throat tightened all the same. He hadn't asked her. He hadn't needed to. Out here words could break on the wind, but a thing made with your own two hands, that never lied. She pressed the ring to her chest, felt the cool metal warm against her skin. Her mother's voice echoed back from years and miles away. Promise me you won't let them make you small. Elena smiled through the sting in her eyes. When Silas stirred later, she was there, sitting beside him on the steps, dawn turning the scorched earth gold again. She held out her hand, the little iron circle snug around her finger. No fanfare, no question. He looked at it, then at her, and for the first time since the fire, he let out a slow, shaking breath that sounded almost like relief. It's not much, he murmured, voice husky. It's everything, she said. Everything we need. And with that, the hush between them grew soft. Not the silence of empty rooms, but the kind you fill together, piece by piece, like boards across a broken barn wall, like fence wire twisted tight enough to hold. By the time the prairie winds warmed and the wild sage began to bloom again, Elena Markova had become more than a rumor in Ironwood Junction. She'd become a lesson in staying. Children who once whispered the foreign bride with cruel curiosity now ran barefoot up the Boone Ranch steps every Tuesday afternoon, sticky fingers clutching scraps of sheet music and half-eaten biscuits. The old upright piano, borrowed from the dusty church storehouse, stood in the corner of Silas's front room. Its keys were yellowed, one missing altogether, but when Elena sat there, her back straight, her braid loose over one shoulder, even the squeaky notes sounded like something gentle enough to hold. Sincerity, she called the tune she taught the children first. A melody stitched together from the hush of dawn, the creak of a barn gate, the way Silas's eyes softened when he watched her play. Some days the children mimicked her accent on purpose, not to mock, but to giggle through each verse, proud to roll their R's and stretch their vowels like she did. She corrected them gently, laughing along. Let them hear me, she thought. Let them know the voice that once left me alone at the train station still carries warmth. Word spread, as word always did. Parents who'd once crossed the street when she passed now tipped their hats, sent over small coin pouches with pickled eggs or garden onions instead. Even the old station master sent his grandson, a shy boy named Henry, who stumbled through scales but beamed when Elena patted his shoulder and said, "Your hands are kind. Kind hands make music." Spring came with all its stubborn hope, and with it the annual festival in Ironwood Junction, the first one Elena dared to attend since stepping off that fateful train. She wore a simple blue cotton dress Clara Whitlow had helped her sew, the little iron ring snug on her finger. Silas stayed near, his wide shoulders like a quiet promise as they moved through the crowd. But some ghosts linger, and Thomas Carter's bitter grin found her before the sun dipped behind the pines. He'd already had too much whiskey, his voice slick with old pride and fresh resentment. "Well, if it isn't the accent herself," he drawled loud enough for heads to turn, "what's it feel like, teaching brats with your foreign tongue? Bet you still got your claws in that cowboy, huh? Nothing like a poor man's pity to keep a mail-order girl fed." Silas stiffened at her side. Elena felt it, the shift in his stance, the way his jaw worked as he swallowed words he'd rather throw like stones. She touched his arm, tried to step forward. But Thomas leaned closer, words sharp enough to cut. You think you're someone now? You're nothing but... But Thomas never finished. One punch, clean, heavy, all the rage Silas Boone never wasted on lies or gossip, cracked across Thomas's jaw. He sprawled into a barrel of cider, boots kicking uselessly at the air. The square fell silent, then rippled with a single, startled cheer. When the lanterns swung gently in the evening breeze, casting pale gold across the makeshift stage behind the church, Elena Markova felt her hands tremble, not with fear, but with something deeper. Gratitude, maybe, or that quiet courage her mother once prayed she'd carry wherever the wind sent her. The children sat in the front row on wooden crates, feet dangling, whispering to each other in half-remembered verses of the song she taught them. Sincerity, the one tune that had held her together through all the nights when she thought her voice might never be enough. She smoothed her dress, the small iron ring catching the lantern light, and cleared her throat. The townsfolk of Ironwood Junction leaned in, some standing, some perched on wagons at the edges of the square. For a moment, the memory of that first train station, the shame, the whispers, flickered behind her eyelids, but it slipped away like steam from a kettle. Tonight, she began, her accent curling each word in the way she no longer tried to hide, I want you to remember something. She looked down at the children, Henry with his kind hands, Jonas leaning forward, his shoulders proud. Your voice, she said, is yours alone. It is every place you have come from, every road you've walked, every hurt you've carried and survived. Do not trade it to fit someone else's pocket. Do not silence it because they fear what it might sing. She paused, heart drumming in her throat. Home is not given to you. You build it, one word, one note, one kindness at a time. At the back near the cottonwoods, she saw him, Silas Boone, arms folded over his chest, hat low, boots dusty from a day's work. He didn't wave, didn't smile wide, but he stayed, steady as fence posts he mended after every storm. He was there when no one else would stand beside her, not to own her, but to see her as she truly was. When her fingers found the first note, the square held its breath. The melody of sincerity rose soft, true, carrying the lesson they'd both earned. That even a rejected bride could become an angel, not by changing her soul, but by being seen, wholly, bravely, exactly as she was. In today's world, where voices are often drowned out by noise, where appearance and fluency are too often mistaken for worth, Elena's story still speaks loud and clear. How many people today feel unheard because of an accent, an age, a past they carry quietly? How many good hearts go unnoticed because they don't shine the way the world expects? Elena didn't change who she was to be accepted. She was seen, truly seen, by someone who knew that love doesn't come from perfection. It comes from presence, from choosing to stay, from actions, not applause. And Silas Boone, a man of few words, taught us something else. Sometimes you don't need to say much at all. Just stand beside someone and not leave. That's love too. In our fast-paced world, we need more stories like this. Stories that remind us that home is not a place handed to you. It's something you build one day, one small act of kindness at a time. So now we ask you, have you ever felt like your voice was overlooked or had to fight to be heard? Do you believe real love today still looks like this? Quiet, loyal, and without performance? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your stories in the comments, especially if you're someone who's loved long, waited patiently, or found home later in life. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to Wild Hearts West Stories, and hit that bell so you never miss another tale of quiet courage and untamed love. Because out here, in the West, in life, sometimes the softest voices carry the deepest truths.